So here we are wrapping up our connecting to the internet section of the lab. We've determined that we have NAT statements set up on our HQ router, but we still can't ping from our client, and we've determined that's because the R&D router does not have a route to the internet. In fact, if we do show IP route, we notice that we have routes to 192.168 networks all in our routing table, some learned by RIP, some learned by connected networks. We do not have a gateway of last resort. So if this router receives traffic that's not in its route table, it's going to return an ICMP message saying destination network unreachable. And that's what Windows is telling us. Destination host or destination network is unreachable. So how do we get the default route into the sales and the R&D router? Well, we could just go into each of these routers and set a static route back to the HQ router, and the HQ router will then handle all the NAT and all the routing at that point. However, if you remember anything from in the course, you'll remember that static routes are evil and should be destroyed with fire. And quite simply, if we set a static route for the default route pointing at this interface on the HQ router, what happens if this link goes down? That means that the R&D department can still get to the HQ. It can get to sales, obviously, by going across this link and then across that link. But it can't get out to the internet because it can't reach its default route. So what we want the HQ router to do is advertise a default route into RIP that says, hey, I'm the default route. Why don't you send all of your traffic to me? Luckily, that's very simple. It's one command in the RIP configuration. So we'll go up here to the HQ router, and we'll go into config mode, and we will do router RIP, and we will do default information originate. And we could optionally specify a route map saying only originate my default information if this particular route is available. In this case, we don't care because it's a lab, and really this default information section is not on the CCENT, but as an instructor, I'm trying to give you the big picture and lead you towards the larger picture that you may see in an actual functioning network. So we do default information originate, and let's go ahead and write the config. So let's look at the route table here on the HQ router and see, does it have a default route? This guy actually does not have a default route. However, it's distributing a default route, and since there's NAT configured on this router and the host it's trying to ping is on the same subnet, you don't really need a default route. In this case, we'll go to the R&D, we'll show the route now, and see we now have gateway of last resort is 192.168.14.1 to network 0000, and that's going out serial 01, which if we look up here in our map, we see serial 01 is connected to HQ, so it's going out the correct network. And so now, let's go to our client number 2, and let's try to ping. And look at that, we get replies back now. But we're not actually able to get to that network. In fact, if we go up here to the HQ router and we do show IP NAT, and we'll do translations, there is the inside address right there, 192.168.12.10, which is this guy up here. We do IP config, 192.168.12.10, that's the inside address. And if I were running a web server on this other guy up here, you'd actually be able to connect to the web server. You'd be able to do anything you want because we're not limiting the NAT to any particular port or anything. So we've verified this works from the R&D. We can actually test the sales using an extended ping command. Let's go ahead and do that just so we can say we've covered it. So we verify that NAT works from the sales up here. First thing we do show IP route to make sure we're getting the default route via RIP like we are over on R&D, and we are. In this case, it's 13.1 via serial 00, and if we look over here at the sales node, serial 00 is going to HQ, so it's also taking the shortest route up to the HQ network, which is what we expect. So let's go onto the sales router, and we could just ping directly from the closest interface, but let's use some of the extended ping commands. In this case, we'll just hit ping. We're going to ping using IP. The target IP address will be 172.18.4.10. Ping 5 times the 100-byte datagram. 2-second timeout. We're going to specify extended commands. Source address or interface will be loopback 10. I'm sorry, we have to actually type out the entire full interface name. Loopback 10. And we'll just take all the defaults on the rest. And there we're able to ping. We go up here to the HQ router and look at the translations table. 192.168.11.1 which if we go back to the sales, do show IP interface brief, 192.168.11.1 is the loopback 10 interface. So we can get from the loopback 10 interface, which in a real network would be our local Ethernet interface in the sales department, and we can get out to the internet and back, and we are actually NATing here at the HQ router rather than just straight out routing the traffic out to the internet. So at this point, I'd say we've finished this particular section of the lab. In the last video in the lab, we will verify that our entire network works exactly as we want it to. We'll fail a couple of things over to make sure that the routes go the way we expect them to, and just generally put a nice bow on the entire lab, and then hand it over to Joe and say, here's your network, have fun with it, don't break it. And we'll do that in the next video.